Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to this first series of Meet the Funders sessions. We're starting today with a very special guest from the European Investment Bank. I have the pleasure to welcome Gerry Muscat, who is head of the division of the Urban Advisory in the European Investment Bank. And we have invited Gerry today to present us what are the funding opportunities, but also the support mechanism that exists in the European Investment Bank when it comes to cities. So very welcome, Gerry. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Many thanks for accepting to be here with us. And I'm going to give you the floor now for you to take your time and present what you have prepared already for these URBACT cities today. And then, as soon as your presentation is over, we can give the floor also to our fellow cities and have a discussion about, and also respond to any questions that exist in regards to your presentation. Welcome, Gerry, and I give you the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. Much appreciated. And it's a real delight to be here with you. And I have a great respect for what URBACT is doing, and very happy to be discussing what the EIB does with cities with you today, and happy to answer questions. So as Jenny was saying, and perhaps Jenny, you could load the presentation, or if the organizers could load the presentation. What I'm going to talk about today is about funding opportunities for cities with the EIB, and as Jenny mentioned, also the work that we do advising cities as well, and how to access these types of advice that we can provide as EIB. Now, just to start, and if I could have the next slide, please, just to start with an overview. The EIB is a big lender to cities. Cities are a very important part of what we do in terms of our financing. Over the last 5 years, we've invested about 107 billion euros into cities, and this represents roughly a third of what we finance across our entire activities, and 90% of that is inside the EU. About 10 to 15% is outside the EU. And as you can see on this slide, the sectors that we are financing: urban development and regeneration, housing, urban mobility, water and sewage. We can finance more or less everything across the city's investment program. Now, if I could take the next slide, what I would like to say in terms of our approach is that we very much take an approach built on the ideas and the concepts in the EU urban agenda. We very much support planning-led urban development and regeneration, and we particularly concentrate our financing into the areas on this slide in urban regeneration, social inclusion, climate, community resilience, and smarter development. And I think in a way, as I said before, we can finance most investments that cities do. Just to draw attention to a few things we can't do, or which we don't do because of our policies. We're really not a bank that finances speculative property development. So for us, it's important that investment leads to economic and social development. We don't finance anything to do with urban sprawl. We focus on regeneration where feasible. We are in the housing area focused on social and affordable housing, and not on market-based housing. So we don't finance mortgage lending for general purpose housing. We finance social and affordable housing, and also energy efficient upgrade of housing. And additionally, we can finance private sector urban development. So things like shopping centers, congress centers, trade fairs, and so on. But they have to have a planning-led dimension to them, and we're not financing them where they're not connected with public transport, or where they're well integrated into the urban environment. And similarly, we would not finance anything that that would be contravening our climate and environmental requirements, floodplain development, for example. And on the smart city side, we very much take a broad view that smart cities is something that is an integrated approach. Of course, technology is an important dimension of it, but we don't finance purely IT-led initiatives which don't adequately involve the citizen and which don't provide improvements to services. So I think it's worth saying a little bit about what we don't finance as well as what we do, because we finance most things. If I may ask for the next slide. Thank you. So in terms of the tools we have, probably the one I spend the most time on is the framework loan, which is a financing tool in which we finance a time slice of the city's investment program, typically on a 3 to 5 year horizon. And typically we're able to do this where we finance cities above about 75,000 people. This normally enables over 3 to 4 years an investment program of 100 million euro or so. We can do smaller programs, but we've typically found that we're able to finance many cities using this approach, and it's a very flexible one where we define the sectors we invest in and the criteria, but we don't identify all the schemes right up at the beginning. So we're able to finance across the city investment program. We also finance bigger investments through what we call investment loans, typically big projects in urban mobility or water or urban regeneration above 100 million in size, where the investments are identified clearly up front and we appraise them up front. And we do a lot of intermediated financing. I'll come back to that in a minute. And we also finance through equity funds, particularly on things like brownfield regeneration, where we have quite a number of funds that are supporting that area in cities. Next slide, please. Now, to give you a few examples of what I mean by this, one of the last loans we signed was with the city of Bologna, which we signed at the end of last year. And this is exactly what I meant about a framework loan. We finance, in this case, investment program of 2021 to 23 of the city. There's a strong emphasis here on climate. So there's a strong component of energy efficient building improvement and sustainable mobility. And also on the social inclusion side, particularly schools and nurseries. And we're linking this with an advisory support to the city, which has actually focused quite a lot on gender and encompassing gender into its development strategy. And we're supporting that component of it during implementation as well. Next slide, please. Another example from Ireland this time is an urban regeneration program that we've financed a couple of years back. We signed, and now it's well under implementation with the city of Limerick, which was in fact experiencing a kind of hollowing out of its city centre, and we supported the city in financing the regeneration of part of the city, particularly an area called the Opera area, and this has resulted in regeneration of this area, creating as an industrial zone, which has also had a number of different investors in it, including the film industry, and also important green building contributions. So this has been an example where there has been private and public involvement together, and we supported the city in enabling a really good urban regeneration program. Next slide, please. Moving on to housing, I wanted to mention social and affordable housing, which is a key priority in this project in the Bassin Minier in France. We have supported the renovation and rehabilitation of housing for the population, which is in an area that is experiencing a transition it's a coal region, and this has been a project which enables the improvement of livelihood in that region, improvement of the housing, but also energy efficiency, and tackling issues like energy poverty as well by improving the energy efficiency of the housing. So really a multi-sector type or multifaceted investment, also focusing on the cultural heritage of that region. Next slide, please. And not to ignore COVID, of course, some of our investment programs in the last couple of years have focused on helping cities to address the investment needs surrounding COVID. And in these areas, we in this particular program in France, we've supported a number of regions, départements, and also cities in financing investments. In fact, we're a little bit flexible on our normal area of financing, so we've enabled the financing of city contributions to help SMEs as well as the infrastructure side, and obviously investments in health and civil protection, as well as wider urban infrastructure to help keep services going, help keep the infrastructure renewal progressing during the crisis. Next slide, please. And just a word to say on the intermediated financing, a lot of what we do, particularly with small towns and cities, is via intermediaries. And as you can see on this slide, some of the ones that we've worked with, Belfius in Belgium, for example, with the Smart Cities program, ILB in Germany, BGK in Poland, and the CDLF in Greece. We have several programs where we are financing multiple municipalities, small investment programs, even down to municipalities of a few thousand, where we can finance it through an intermediary, which can help us in administering the disbursement of funds and the reporting. Now over to the advisory in the next slide, please. I just wanted to say a short word as well, that EIB is not just about providing long-term financing. This is our main goal, of course, and our lending is typically 30, 40 years in duration, so and it's attractively priced. So we are doing a lot of co-financing with EU funds, but additional to that, we also provide advice, and we have a number of programs that enable us to do that. One of the best known ones perhaps is JASPERS, which helps prepare projects for EU funding under the structural funds, and the urban dimension of that is an important one. We have as well an URBIS, which is an advisory facility in the context of the European Investment Advisory Hub, that enables us to provide support to projects. That's morphing into InvestEU, in fact. So in particular will enable us moving forward to support projects under InvestEU. And we have other instruments which many of you may be familiar with. ELENA on the energy efficiency side, for example, FICAMPUS to support the development of urban development funds, and so on. Next slide, please. So just to give a couple of examples on the advisory side before I finish, I think that in Leipzig, obviously a very important city, from the new Leipzig Charter, which was signed or adopted by ministers at the end of last year. We've supported the city along with a number of partners, in fact, to help them in planning on their carbon neutrality and looking at how to use a multi-criteria approach to prioritize technologies and identify the priority investments that would be needed to help in that goal. Next slide. Another example from Poland, in the city of Wałbrzych, which is in the southwest of Poland, the far southwest of Poland. Again, a city which is a coal transition region, and in fact the city had already transitioned its industrial base towards the car industry, but had not really adequately invested in its urban infrastructure, in its cultural infrastructure, and in its offer for younger citizens. So people have been leaving the city. The city needs to keep the population, attract the population, ensure that it can retain the young people that live there, and especially in the context of a quite thriving urban economy, how to achieve that. So we've helped advise Wałbrzych, bringing together Wałbrzych with other cities through a program together with the London School of Economics, to link up with other cities facing similar transition goals, and advising on how to prioritize investments to achieve that broader objective. Next slide, please. I mentioned Jaspers earlier on, and Jaspers is clearly an important partner in supporting cities in relation to their investments with structural funding. And the advisory that we provide in this context is actually quite broad. We can provide support to cities to help them with some of the strategic underpinning of their investments, and looking at their ITI strategies or sustainable urban development strategies, as well as actually preparing the investments themselves and looking at the nuts and bolts of project preparation. So next slide, just to give a couple of examples of what Jaspers does. It does everything on project preparation through from concept definition, strategic coherence, through to looking at demand and options analysis, through to looking at the bankability of projects, the way funding can be brought to bear in a project design, and how to optimize and benchmark projects against each other when we're talking about multiple investments. Last slide I'd like to just finish on is with the city of Gdańsk in Poland, which is an example of a city where the EIB through various instruments has provided advice on a very broad range of investments that the city has been doing. So on urban transport, on the port, which is a port city, of course, culture, looking at the European Solidarity Center, which is a major cultural icon now in Poland, and also on the water and wastewater sector, waste to energy, energy and power transmission, through to climate change and adaptation, which Gdańsk has been included in a program looking at climate adaptation investment as well. So it just gives an example of the range of things that the bank has been able to support, both on the financing and the advisory side, across the city's investment program. I think I will stop there, and very happy to take questions and enter into a discussion. But back to you then, Jenny.
Many thanks, Gerry. And yes, let's kick off the ball of questions. I already have one question, Liend, and personally speaking, I have lots that I can ask just after. The first question is, I think you mentioned all this already, but perhaps you can give us a bit more details. So there was a question about if you finance public authorities directly, or also private organizations that will invest in cities.
Yeah, it's a good question. And so most of our financing with cities is direct to cities. So we lend directly to cities without any sovereign guarantees or government guarantees, taking the risk of the city. And we can also do that not only with cities, but with municipal companies like water companies or public transport companies, where in some cases we would need a city guarantee, in other cases not. So normally we are financing on the public sector side, and we can also finance, as I mentioned, through let's say intermediaries, which can also be public sector. So the types of the German Landesbanks, for example, or the national promotional banks, some of which are focused on urban, we can lend to them as well. But we can also provide financing through private organizations too. So we do this, for example, where we are financing a private sector developer which has received a concession or which has been contracted by a city to finance the regeneration of a piece of land. For example, we did that recently in Nancy for an investment to upgrade part of the center of Nancy, which has a cultural and tourism component to it. And we can also finance developments like shopping centers and station upgrades and so on, where the private sector is involved. And we can come in on the private sector side. The key there, though, is that we always still talk to the city. We want to make sure that these investments are not, let's say, purely property-led, but they are actually contributing to the long-term regeneration of the city and have strong public benefits as well. But so that I hope that helps answer the question.
Absolutely, Gerry. Thank you very much. All right. If there are more questions, please, you can use the chat or you can share your screen and audio and join us on the stage. As Dino has done, Dino Alessi from Italy, I suppose. Would you like to take the floor and ask your question?
Yes, okay. Good afternoon. I'm from Messina, actually, in Sicily. Well, I don't have a specific question. Well, actually, I'm curious about the procedure for applying to get a financement from this public institution. Is it how complicated is it? What kind of specific requirements are necessary? I'm curious about the procedure, because we have never applied for this public financement.
Yeah, well, there are a number of channels, in fact. So the EIB has offices in all of the countries. So we have our offices in Rome. It's not in Sicily, but it's in Rome. So we have a team of colleagues there who can be contacted about investment in Italian cities. We can be reached through the internet, through our website, where there are contact details that you can reach us on. We have a team dedicated to financing investments in Italy in general, and included in that in the urban sector. And in fact, we have been doing, as I mentioned, the example of Bologna. I think last year we also financed Milan, and we have been financing investments in Italian regions as well, such as Puglia. So we have done a lot in Italian cities, and we've also done quite a lot of financing through the CDP, the CDP, the Cassa Depositi, on different investment facilities as well. So I think that what I would say is that, as I mentioned, the EIB has a certain focus on size. So for a direct loan from the EIB, we would need to finance a program of investment that would be, let's say, 50 to 100 million minimum. So that's why I say typically we're looking at investment programs over 3 to 4 years, which could be, let's say, 20 million euro a year, for example. And so we would not be the bank naturally to go to if you have a small investment that you want to have financed, of €500,000 in a particular thing. It would be probably too low for us to go directly, and in such cases we would be more likely to finance such programs through intermediaries. But we can be reached easily through the contacts on our website, and also in terms of advice, the EU, the advisory hub, the European Investment Advisory Hub has a website for advice where cities can also apply through that for advice on urban matters as well.
Thank you, Gerry. I think I will go a bit deeper with Dino's question because I'm also interested in the procedure. So I was wondering whether if a city is interested in applying to finance an integrated action plan. Here we have cities with an integrated action plan that is going to be ready in the coming months. So can, for example, if they think they can finance one of these actions of their plans, how should they go through the European Investment Bank? Are there calls every now and then, or is it something that's open and its applications are received on a daily basis?
Yes, we don't really use calls, so we function like a typical bank in that sense. So cities are always welcome to contact us, and we initiate discussion. The way it normally works is that if a city is considering financing options for its investment program, they would contact the EIB, and then we would have probably one of our loan officers who would be speaking, in this case, Italian, and be able to converse directly and have a good knowledge of the local context, would discuss the investment program and get a broad idea if it's broadly feasible that we could do a financing. And then what we normally do is we make a short internal discussion among the projects teams, which is where I come in, and our lending team, and then we come back to the city with a questionnaire to ask more detail about the investment program, and to try to understand the size of the program, and also to look into the various technical aspects that we need to understand, and then we would typically do what we call an appraisal, where we would send a team to the city to have, let's say, 2 days of discussions with the city about the investment program, and that is the basis on which we prepare our investment application to our operations committee, our management committee, and ultimately our board. And obviously our loan officers would in parallel be discussing the pricing and the financing aspects with the treasurer of the city. So I think that the key in a way for us is to have a good understanding of the investment program, to really understand if it's planning led, to look at whether the strategies of the city are not just things that are, on a shelf and nice glossy brochures, but they actually connect to the investments themselves. So understanding how do the investment program fit with the different strategic documents that the city has, understanding the stage of preparedness of the project. So as I mentioned, we don't necessarily need to have all the projects already prepared and approved. We can finance a program where we will say, 60 or 80% of it can be actually coming in the next 3-4 years, and we will be reviewing it as it comes. But we have to have a broad overview and be comfortable that the city's investment program is properly planned, and that there is a multi-annual investment program, and that the investments are coherent with the strategy. And then we go into questions on environmental assessment, on procurement, on the planning process, whether projects have been already approved in the city budget for their financing, the issues like land acquisition and so on. So we go through in quite some detail typically with the city investment department, and then we consult also the relevant sector units, or even if it's mobility, we can talk to the transport department of the city and perhaps the transport company as well. Similarly for housing and water. And then we make this appraisal and go to our board with the package, and then it would normally be approved. And the whole process typically takes between 6 months and 18 months, depending on how reactive the city is to the questions that we ask. This is typically what happens.
Thank you, Gerry. I have another question, a bit more
Thank you very much.
strategic, perhaps, for a city. These are loans. The European Investment Bank offers loans. So that means that these loans have to be reimbursed at a certain time. They are not grants. So I was wondering if you can give us an example of how usually cities proceed as soon as they have received the money from the bank, at what time and how they generate profit that then there will be this return to investment.
Yeah, the very good question. So basically, you're right. The EIB is a lender. We are not a grant provider, but we are often co-financing with grant funding, either from national sources or from the EU. So a lot of what we do is provide loans which are used by the city as the kind of own contribution to investments that they co-finance with EU funding, such as through the cohesion and structural funds. Or it could be also the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, or other facilities. But as you say, we do require that the loans are repaid. And part of it, what we look at is it's not only where we look at where are the sources of revenue for the repayment of the loan. We're also very much concerned about is there enough funding that has been allocated by the city to maintain the assets once they are constructed from the proceeds of the loan, because we don't want to be financing new investments that then are basically, let's say, going to disrepair after a short amount of time because they can't be repaired. Now, the city, as I'm sure you're well aware, cities will generate funding to pay back the loan from many sources. So when we're talking about public investment in things which are not revenue generating, like schools or theaters or roads or even public transport investments where there might be some revenue recovery from tickets, but not enough to pay back the whole of the loan. The city is going to have to repay the loan from its revenue that comes from its in the city budget, from local taxes, from their share of central local transfers, and through central government grants, and so on and so on. In other cases, where there is really a clear revenue generating potential, and for example, in urban regeneration, this is very much the case, where we may finance the regeneration of a site, and then the developers that are involved in that will be paying part of the funding back for the infrastructure that's underpinning it, or paying a contribution to the regeneration costs. There may well be private sector sources of revenue. And if they're strong enough, we can ring fence the project and do the project off budget for the city. So we are quite often involved in helping cities to decide what type of financing structure they might use, and whether it is feasible to look at financing the project in a way that, let's say, reduces the engagement of the city's own funding into the project. This is part of what we can also advise on, in fact. So, there's no one answer to this question, but it's a very important one.
Thank you, Gerry. I have a question in the chat about what is the usual range of interests with which you lend the municipalities for project implementation?
Yes, I think this is about the interest rates we charge, and I'm not really the best person to ask about that because I'm not the one that negotiates the interest rates. What I can tell you is that the EIB is a AAA rated institution, so we fund ourselves very cheaply on the capital markets. So we are able to provide long-term financing, as I mentioned, typically 30 years and upwards, for city investment programs, matching the economic life of the assets, in fact. And generally, the funding is considered by city treasurers to be attractive. Now, that depends on the timing in the market cycles, and it depends also on the country and the city creditworthiness. So there are, of course, some cities that can find financing in the bond markets or in the banking sector, which is comparable in rates to ours. But in general, the bank is attractive in terms of its financing. I can't really give you interest rates. I'm always asked this question, and I really can't do that. It depends on the context. It depends on the city, on the country, on the project. But this is something that can be discussed quite early in the discussion with the bank for a particular case.
Gerry, there is another related question, which is, what is the added value of getting a loan through European Investment Bank if a city can go through a bank with good rates? Do you have a comparative overview already?
Well, that's a good question. And again, it depends on the situation. I think some cities like to work with us because they see our approach differing from commercial banks in that we kind of give I might call it a seal of approval almost, that the investment program really makes sense, is coherent, has been looked at by international infrastructure specialists and found to be sound. And some cities value that. They value being able to tell the city council that the EIB has considered favorably their investment program. So this is one value added. Again, I mentioned advisory during my presentation. In some cases, like we have done in Bologna, but we have done in many other cities, we're able to combine our lending with providing support and advice as well, which is typically free. So if we can provide advice to a city, they may appreciate that that can link in with the investment. For example, I mentioned in Valbrick about prioritization of investments. It's not only the funding, but also where to focus the scarce resources of the city. If we can provide advice on things like that, the city may find that interesting. I think some cities also find that they would like to diversify their funding base. So some cities, for example, may typically get some funding from the bond markets. They may get some funding from a municipal bank in their country, and they may like to have an additional financier as well, all of which may have reasonably comparable rates, but they're diversifying their funding sources. So there are a range of reasons that I would say.
Thank you, Gerry. Gerry, you mentioned before, especially the framework loans that are dedicated to, especially to cities above 75,000 people. So I was wondering, because in URBACT we do have cities of smaller size. So I was wondering whether you also provide loans to smaller cities.
Yes, we have done in some cases. It does depend on whether the city's budget would enable, for example, we have found, for example, cities of even 30, 40,000 people could have a budget where over, let's say, 4 or 5 years, the city can have an investment program of 50, 60, 70 million euro, which is just about it, at a size where the EIB can come in directly. But I would say that in many cases, such cities are difficult for us to finance directly, and we would typically work through an intermediary bank when that's the case. I will give you an example. I mean, we're working with the BGK in Poland, the Bank Gospodarski Krajowego in Poland, where we have a facility that enables us to co-finance with them municipalities of smaller size across Poland. And we can work with them on doing that. In Belfius, in Belgium, we were able to finance very small municipalities, building on the fact that they have branches all over Belgium. and we're able to access EIB funding even in small towns down to 5,000 people, and small investments of €500,000 or whatever. So in such cases, the city might not even know that they're getting EIB funding. They may be getting funding from the intermediary bank, and they may find out that it's EIB behind that. But I would say, we cannot, unfortunately, given that we're an international European institution with a relatively small team, we just can't work directly with small investments of small size. The only exception might be if they're really strategically significant, very important investments that have a strong climate dimension or a very strong innovative dimension, where we might make an exception because of the let's say the demonstration effect that such a project might have with other cities. So these are, sometimes there are cases like that.
Thank you, Gerry. And we do have a few minutes before the end, so I'd like a bit to speak about any tips, advice you can offer to our cities, and especially about how preparing a good application to the European Investment Bank. What perhaps any lessons learned so far from your experience that could be useful for our cities?
Yes, I'd be happy to share a few thoughts. So I think that now we are in a situation where climate is really a key topic, and sustainable finance is a key topic for all of us. The EIB we are calling ourselves Europe's Climate Bank now, and we have a strong focus on this. But it's not only us. I think that for many reasons that are well understood, climate is a key consideration now, and more cities are having carbon neutrality goals and wanting to look at financing of their investments through that lens. I would say that cities need to start thinking about how they can best attract sustainable finance. And I think that when we look at the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance, I think one of the most tricky areas that we find is when we come to a city and we ask the city authorities, are your investments in your multi-year investment program in line with the sustainable finance taxonomy, and thereby also with EIB requirements? And we often find cities are not really aware very much of the details of the taxonomy and what it means for cities. They are. I think this is an area that is going to be increasingly important. And you may be aware of the city's mission that's been launched by the Commission, which I think will engage 100 cities to enter into climate contracts. I think this will be an important thing. And I think in order to prepare for financing that could be a lot cheaper through sustainable finance instruments in the future, and which could be almost a requirement for financing from banks like ours moving forward. I think cities need to start preparing a bit more thought into how do they know whether their investment program is Paris aligned? How do they know whether it's making a substantial contribution to climate? It's not enough just to say, oh well, it's energy efficiency improvement in the building. Is it does it go far enough? It's not enough to say, well, it's a near zero energy building. Is it actually going beyond regulation sufficiently to qualify as green finance? So I think this is one area that I would say is going to be more and more important, and it's probably the area where we are finding that when we appraise a project, it's taking a lot longer to understand this and to really discuss it with the city than we ever did in the past. And it certainly is a big area of importance for the EIB for financing. So preparing on that score is I think very, very important. I think that the other thing I would say is when engaging with a bank like the EIB, but any lender really, I think preparing the let's say the arrangements for having a counterpart for the bank is very important. And what we find, when I said that the lending process can take anything from 6 months to 18 months, where it works the fastest is where the mayor or the treasurer or the head of the investment department allocates somebody to be a partner for the bank to help address issues, questions, to link with the other teams within the city administration to answer questions and to be available for discussion, and provides that link with the investor. And that I think is something that cities sometimes don't pay so much attention to. And it's obviously much more difficult for smaller cities, which don't have the same institutional capacity, but it's not only a question for smaller cities as well. I think this is very, very important. And I think the third thing I would say is, I mentioned it during my presentation, this link between the city strategies and the investment program. And the decision process in the city itself, being able to explain to a lender why the investments are important, what they are really going to bring economic benefits to the city, and that there really is this integrated approach, that the investment program is more than the sum of its parts, that it links to the development goals of the city. Being able to actually articulate that, we see a lot of cities that have investment programs which are really they are kind of a shopping list of the different deputy mayors that they would like to see, and they're not necessarily as integrated as one may want to see, or they may have been let's say developed without really thinking so much about the strategies, and the strategies are there, but the investment program may have a life of its own, which is politically motivated, or which is coming from even very validly from citizen requests and so forth. Really linking this together and demonstrating the coherence of investments is in a way a kind of a timeless thing, but it's very important to lenders like us, particularly where we're looking beyond, will we get our loan repaid? We're looking at, does this investment actually bring value to the city and to the citizens? And that's what we need to understand. So there's a few pointers on my side. I could talk about that all day.
I'm sure, Gerry, I'm sure. And I hope that we will have a follow-up discussion, hopefully in the City Festival in June in Pantin. You are already aware of this, Gerry. Perhaps it will be good also that you meet our cities in person and have this conversation face-to-face. I think it will be the best for everybody. So before we close, I think that you gave us really good points about how a city can now move on and what really to think of, because we also, in the URBACT terminology, we speak about integrated action plans. Even though there is always a thematic entry in a project, let's say if it's about urban regeneration of a district, then I completely understood that that a city has to think how this regeneration can be more climate and carbon neutral. So we have to see all the projects that will be applied as integrated ones with perhaps a specific focus on the environment. And also, the local context, what we call the sustainable finance taxonomy, which is the first time I hear about, and perhaps other people here too. So this is something also that we need to reflect on. Perhaps we can have a follow-up discussion specifically on this, what this means. So I'd like really to thank you, because I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I also have some positive comments for your presentation, Gerry, which I really much appreciate it. I'd like to thank you, and I hope I see you again, hopefully in the City Festival once again. And until then, take care.